Hello. Just checking my levels. Okay. Apologies if this is a little noisier than normal because my fan is going. It is very hot, and I was definitely feeling like I was going to overheat if I didn't have this fan on and this fan on over here. So hopefully it's not too much of a bother. If it really is getting in the way of being able to hear me, please do let me know and I'll see what I can do. Okay, so thanks for coming, everybody who is watching live, and thanks to the folks who are watching later on. First, I'm going to do a couple shout outs real quick. Thank you to Necroion, Nerdlets, and Foagni for following the channel on Twitch in the last week, and thank you to folks who are subscribed over on YouTube. The video on demand will be over there later today. Also, if you didn't see, I have a short video experiment that I recorded on kind of using environments in Daggerheart to kind of streamline and speed up your GM prep. And that is a timed exclusive for paid Patreon subscribers over at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood. I'll put the link in here. Hey, Andrew. Thanks for coming by. Good to see you. It was a very fun chat yesterday. I look forward to talking more about that thing. Probably the best part of collaborating with people is having more reasons to talk about having secret projects. That's really the thing. So I decided to change my change the layout real quick. So what I'm going to do is, hi everybody. Today we are going to talk about integrating player character backstories in your TTRPG campaign. This could also definitely be integrating character stories in other forms of storytelling, but I'm going to mostly be talking about TTRPGs, and I'm going to use examples from Daggerheart. If you don't know me, my name is Mike Underwood. I was an additional designer on Daggerheart, as well as an additional designer on the Quick Start Guide, or Quick Start Adventure, and the lead designer of Marauders of Windfall, which was last year's Gen Con adventure. And so I have lots of thoughts and ideas about Daggerheart, but this is not an official stream. It's not officially associated with Darrington or Critical Role. This is my personal perspective and my individual thoughts about the game and how you can kind of make it do what it is best able to do and have the most fun with it. I'm not speaking for anybody else here, just myself. So this is a topic that I have been paying particularly close attention to in the last couple of months since Daggerheart was released, because I have been running a lot of introductory learn to play and one-shot games. And what I've found is that I can feel really comfortable doing only a tiny amount of prep for these games, if any prep at all, as long as I have good answers to the character background questions and prompts, and I have the ability to do a little bit of extra follow-up with those players in getting a couple of extra answers, and then I take what they've already created in answering their background questions and the connection questions, and I use that to weave together the backstory and the setting elements that that those players have created to give myself a more cohesive cast of characters, set of factions, locations that are going to be relevant, and so on. So if we look here on the text, you'll get a little bit of a preview of what it is that I'm doing. So I want to talk about kind of 4 elements real quick. We're going to go back to here. 4 elements that I think are really important for backstory questions, or for, in other games, a character's backstory write-up or notes to provide for me so that as a GM, I feel like I have some material to use in weaving together those backstories and generating really character-centric plot. And by character-centric, I mean the story of this campaign or this one-shot is largely about your characters and things that are important to your characters. In a one-shot, right, I try to make it really focused on these characters and what they want and who they care about, because since we don't have a lot of time to develop the characters, I kind of just have to take big swings. And if you've got a rival in your backstory, I need to use that rival and put them on screen and have them being a jerk slash being a foil to you, because that's how we're going to get emotional resonance in a shorter form. In a longer campaign, I'm still going to want to use all these elements, but I'm going to be tying them together and then deploying them a little bit more slowly over the course of more play, rather than trying to connect things together and then use all of what I have created, or as much of what I've created as I can. So those answers should identify and or define ideally one or more of the following elements: some aspect of character motivation, or reveal or detail something about the character's personality, whether that is talking about their trauma or inciting incidents that drove them to be who they are, or it is gesturing toward some kind of like emotional wounds that they may have in terms of something that's happened to them or that they've done that has a big emotional impact on them and is going to inform how they are going to act in the world. And ideally, these are signaled from the player to me so that I know that they, as the player, are interested in exploring, challenging, or like developing or iterating on these aspects of who the character is, right? It's not just what did you think about this character, but what does your character, having had that opinion, suggest about who they are, what they value, and what they want for themselves. Hey, CBTN Cosmo, thank you so much for subscribing with Prime, and thanks for being here. Right, so that's number one, character motivation or personality, right, about the person themselves. The second is detailing a group that is relevant to that player character. That might be a settlement or their community, right? In Daggerheart, we have communities that represent the kind of environment and the mores that you grew up and internalized. Or we might be talking about a faction that your character is a part of, or that your character is in opposition to, or is in opposition to your character. CPTN Cosmo says, thanks for the good Daggerheart content, especially today's topic. Well, thank you so much for being here, and I'm really glad you appreciate it. So that's a group. The third option that I really like looking for is an important NPC, right? This could be a mentor, it could be a rival. Those are two both really good options. These could be somebody you've lost in your life who's the absence of whom is like a big deal to your character. Or it could be, right, like an ex-lover or a friend that you're either estranged from or that is still important to you, right? Somebody you went to magic school with, and then either you've kind of parted ways or had a breaking in or a breach in how you think about the world, right? So that you're more on the way to being rivals or enemies, or somebody who is out there that you care about, that you're either trying to get back to or do something on their behalf, or that their presence or absence or how they think about the world and act and work in the world is relevant to your character in an ongoing manner. And then the last of these four categories that I really look for, sorry, I'm going to move where I am because I'm leaning a little bit. The last of these that I look for is a important location or a key object. And I put these together because they each tend to come up a little bit more often, and I felt like having four categories instead of five. How you categorize these, I think, is incredibly personal, and there's no one right way of doing it or one best way of doing it. I wanted to just have a few categories because I'm going to walk us through the background questions for the Daggerheart core book classes, the 9 classes in the main book, and how I see or what I look for in the answers to those questions, right? I think these questions set the player up to detail these elements of story, characters, places, motivations, things, and so on. So we're going to jump back over to here, and these are in alphabetical order. This is straight from the SRD. So boom, remember we're using the SRD, and we've got that kind of flaming bottle logo. For Bard, you'll notice that I have blue as important NPC. A lot of what Bards are about are their relationships with other characters, right? What they feel about other characters. Who, person from your community, a group, taught you to have such confidence in yourself, right? And that confidence in yourself could be a key motivation as well, depending on how the player is expressing what it is to be a bard for them, right? How much is their confidence in their self a big deal? But stepping back, we have the potential for kind of hitting 3 elements at once in this one question. So that's great, right? It's asking you to detail a character. Implicitly, you're going to be talking about your community because they are a character who emerges from your community. And then your relationship to them is that they taught you to have confidence in yourself. This intimates that the bard character, that a bard is going to have confidence in themselves. As a reminder, we can always change or replace these questions when we're doing our game of Daggerheart, right? These are written because they're like, I see them as creating specific setup for dramatic intent and the types of relationships that a character of that class is probably going to want to interact with, right? I see a lot of intentionality in how these are written, but if they don't fit your character and it feels like answering this is not setting you up to be able to work with the GM in a productive fashion, or it doesn't feel true to the character, absolutely change these. But what I would ask is to keep some of these other ideas in mind, right? Motivation, group that's relevant, NPCs that are important, and or important locations or key objects. Ways that your character is tied to the world and or that you are setting them up with specific like dramatic intent, right? Here is the kind of arc I'm looking to explore with this character. So your mentor is reflective of or in contrast with the community that your character comes from. And there's that suggestion that you have confidence in yourself and that when that confidence is being tested, we can refer back to this mentor or this teacher character or some exemplar, right? A parent, any number of types of characters. Number 2, you were in love once, right? This is an important thing about your character. Probably. If you don't want this to be a big deal, right? You could have your aromantic bard, your asexual bard, totally fine. You probably want to tweak that in this case, unless there's a way to make that question feel like it is good and useful for your character. Right? We're going to adjust these to help us set things up to have the most fun in the way that we want to have fun. So who is this person that you were in love with and how did they hurt you, right? It's not just you were in love once. This person was really important to you. You were in love with them and then they hurt you in some way. It doesn't say automatically that this person was in love with you, right? So you can have an unrequited love and they could have hurt you. That you could, Cosmo. Okay, thank you, Cosmo. Right? You could take in love and interpret in a broader fashion, right? You were devoted to somebody and then they hurt you, right? You could have been a court jester who like admired the queen, maybe even without it being romantic, but then she hurt you in some way. And this creates somebody out there who has, in some way, probably emotional leverage on your character. It shows that your character has loved and lost, and that gives them a certain type of experience or perspective on the world. And it sets your character up to potentially fall in love or come to love another character. But in doing that, they're going to bring that baggage from this previous relationship with them, right? It might make them more averse. It might make them more hesitant to get into a relationship, or it might have helped teach a character what they needed in life, what was real, what wasn't real, and then they're able to be more in the kind of emotional place that they need to be in order to pursue a healthy relationship. These questions can be interpreted in a really broad fashion, but my encouragement to you as a GM and as a designer in general, when you're playing and when you're GMing, help your players to try to get really specific with these answers so that you don't necessarily have to detail everything about your character, but once you've done your backstory questions, your background questions, and some connection questions, you've got a few pretty solid ideas about who this character is, where they've been, what's important to them. And then you can use those as a foundation to build up who that character is. So I'm going to end this tangent and get back on track so that we can walk through the rest of these questions. You've always looked up to another bard. Who are they and why do you idolize them, right? This is another character. You have a relationship of admiration with them, right? If we were doing Fabula Ultima, this would probably be a bond of admiration. Why do you idolize them speaks to who this character is, right? Do you idolize them because they are famous, because they are very skilled, because they have traveled the world, because their songs come from experience and prowess as an adventurer, right? It speaks to maybe the kind of bard that you want to become. So that's bards. Druids are maybe a little bit more oriented towards community or groups. I will note that who has been trying to hunt you down could be a group or it could be an individual. I flagged group because it has that possibility, and I want to encourage people to think with the possibilities of a broad answer or interpretation of some of these questions. So, why was the community you grew up in so reliant on nature and its creatures, right? For you to be a druid, you had to have this question is kind of suggesting that you had to have been a part of a community that was reliant on nature and the creatures of nature. If this isn't the case for you, that raises the question of how did you become a druid if you weren't a part of a community where nature and animals were that important? That becomes its own interesting question. Who was the first wild animal you bonded with? Why did your bond end? Right? So we have an important figure, this animal that you bonded with, your first bond. It's suggesting that that's important. Why did the bond end? That probably speaks to either a choice that you made or something that happened to you and that animal such that that bond ended, right? Did the animal die? Did you have to part ways with them? In the game that I play on Wednesdays, I'm playing a druid, and my character bonded with a kind of a wood forest animal as her first bond, but the character is wanderborn, and so the community left that wooded area, and that animal that she was bonded with just could not survive well in the desert that they went to afterward. And to make this more personal, right, to dig deeper, I said that she knew that this was hard on this animal that she had bonded with, but she couldn't bring herself to break that bond and send the animal back to the woods, to the point that a more senior druid in her community had to basically force the issue, right? Kind of staged an intervention and forced them to separate this bond so that the character has this sense of guilt and responsibility about not having been strong enough or courageous enough or mature enough to not just understand that the bond needed to end, but to be the one to end that herself, right? Instead, somebody else made that decision, and that is something that reflects on who the character was and is setting me up to then let her actions in the campaign be in contrast to that, to show a sense of change and growth. Question number 3, who has been trying to hunt you down? What do they want from you, right? And so this can be a group. What do they want from you could also maybe speak to motivation or characterization, personality of your character, right? What do they want from you? They want to take your beast form transforming shapeshifting powers for themselves, right? Or they want some object that you have that you got in some other situation, right? Who has been hunting you down and what do they want from you? This also sort of implies why are they hunting you down? And I would encourage players to think about answering that, or at least considering it when they are answering these questions. Right, I'm going to go a little bit faster so we can get to the weaving things together, but I wanted to kind of unpack each of these at least a little bit. So Guardian. I see these Guardian questions as being a lot about the person, right? Who you are, why do you make the choices that you've made? Hey, Cardboard Enjoyer. So who from your community, right? This is a character and it speaks to your community. Did you fail to protect? And why do you still think of them? This is not just somebody you failed to protect, but that failure is meaningful to your character in an ongoing fashion. So when you make this decision, right, it's probably a good idea to pick somebody who you want your character to think of often, at least at the beginning of the campaign, right? That loss made a big impression on them. They're from your community, so you can also speak to what was your role within your community? Were you a protector at that time, or did you become a protector afterward because you failed to protect this person? Right? You can characterize your community through who this person you failed to protect is. Just because you failed to protect them doesn't mean that they're necessarily dead, right? They could be injured in an ongoing fashion. You could have failed to protect somebody socially, right? Somebody was like being victimized within the community and you failed to protect them when you used to be a lawyer, or when you used to be a city guard, or when you used to be a member of the town council, right? Guardians are about protecting other people, but what it means to protect someone doesn't always have to be so immediately literal and physical. Guardians are good at tanking physically, but that can also be a representation or an expression of an overall personality of being a protector. And the question here is pointing in that direction. Number 2, you've been tasked with protecting something important, right? So this is an object, and delivering it somewhere dangerous. So that also suggests a location. So you've been entrusted with an important object, so that means that you were worthy of trust to someone or some group. They saw you as the best option or the best person to do this delivery. It's not just going somewhere, it's going somewhere dangerous. What is it and where does it need to go? So you're creating the object, the place it needs to go, why that place is dangerous, and there's a little bit the question of why were you picked for this, right? What about who you are or what your relationships are means that you were that person. In the games I have played in, this question for the Guardian has really been super important. The first one has also played a big role in one of the campaigns that I ran in the playtest. But I want to encourage folks to think about this one. I also really like this question because it's really dense and there's a lot of layers to it. You can get a bunch of characterization and world building out of a well thought through answer to this question. Yeah, right. Cardboard Enjoyer says this is one of the best questions. Agree. Number 3, you consider an aspect of yourself to be a weakness. What is it and how has it affected you, right? This is all about your character's conception of self, right? And what you think is a weakness, other people may not think is a weakness, right? You may think that your desire to jump into every fight is a weakness because you're too easily baited. But for other people, they know they can depend on you to jump to their defense. So that contrast, if you want to set it up, between how a person thinks about some aspect of themselves and how it affects other people is interesting, right? Because that could add a dimension of some other character or group to this question if you want it, right? What's that thing you consider a weakness and how has it affected you? It's not just something that you're going to play up in the campaign. It has affected you already, right? Did you get yourself into trouble within that community because of this thing that you see as a weakness? This could be connected to somebody that you failed to protect, but it doesn't have to be, right? With the Guardian questions, a lot of the stuff is internal. And so I might recommend or suggest for somebody playing a Guardian that if this weakness has affected other people and affected you, maybe you choose somebody who isn't that one person you failed to protect, so that you have a couple, maybe you have a larger number of relationships, not just to only this one character in this community, maybe other people in that community, people outside of that community. Figure out what works for you. Cardboard Enjoyer says, this helps a newer player think about a weakness that's something else than just their lowest stat. Absolutely, right? I think you could use a low stat, but something that they consider a weakness also suggests and leaves more room for other people don't see this as a weakness, right? Other people see this as a strength, or they just see it neutrally. So for the Ranger, we have a terrible creature. This is an NPC. Hurt your community, right? They have a relationship to a group that is relevant to your character, your community, and you vowed to hunt them down, right? You have expressed intention about your relationship and the future actions. Then it asks more about this creature. What are they, and what unique trail or sign do they leave behind, right? Because Rangers are expert trackers. And so having a trail or sign of a creature that the GM can sprinkle into the game here or there is going to kind of ping or try to set a hook out for that Ranger. This also suggests part of maybe why you were a Ranger. Did you become a Ranger because this terrible creature hurt your community, right? Rangers are hunters. They move through the natural world with expertise, but they are bone and sage, right? Tactical acumen, skill with agility in the body, but also a relationship with and power over the natural world. Number 2, your first kill almost killed you too. What was it? And then, speaking to motivation, what part of you was never the same after that event? Right? So this could be a physical way that you were never the same, right? Did it leave a scar? Did it, take your hand and so now you have a prosthesis? What part of you was never the same? Is this like more emotional, right? This kill almost killed you, but you killed it, as it's written here, right? So this suggests that you had a climactic confrontation with some animal, maybe, but it says your first kill. It says what was it rather than who was it. I think you could do a who if you really wanted, especially a character who being a hunter isn't necessarily as much about animals, though it's probably good to have some of that because we have that first question about a terrible creature. So there's some latitude there. Your first kill almost killed you too. So it's asking us to think about and articulate a moment or a sequence in this character's life that was important, where they almost died, and then something about the character was never the same, right? Your motivation has changed, your physical form has changed, your mindset has changed. And then number 3, you've traveled many dangerous lands, but what is one place you refuse to go? This is telling you and suggesting this character is probably worldly, but it's asking the player to create or describe some place that the ranger really doesn't want to go. And of course, they're going to have to go there in many campaigns, right? You're setting up a scary place somewhere in your world and flagging the ranger's probably going to have to go there. But if you refuse to go there now, maybe something about how you see the world or who you are will have changed by the time you have to go there. And does that help suggest a sense of growth or change? For the rogue, what did you caught doing that got you exiled from your home community? So this instantly suggests some action you did that had a big repercussions. It asks you to talk a little bit about your home community. You'll characterize that community by saying what it is this thing you did, right? Did you do something that gets you thrown out of your community that wouldn't get you exiled from other places? Well, that says something about what this community is and what they value. It also suggests that the rogue is without a home community, right? They are an outsider to some degree, or they have been rendered an outsider to their home community. If it's really important to your character that this not be true, what I might suggest in exchange is that maybe you hold on to you got caught doing something that changed your relationship to your community, because rogues are frequently very much about crime, right? They are the sneaky type. They are criminals with maybe relationships if they are the syndicate rogue, or they are a little bit more like thiefy assassiny if they are the other subclass, which I think is Nightwalker, Shadow, and then the feature is Shadow Stepping. Some of the names have changed, so apologies. I could look it up here, but that would be a little bit more of dead air. Number 2, you used to have a different life, but you've tried to leave it behind. This suggests that for a lot of rogues, you were more all the way in on crime in some way. It doesn't have to be that, right? You used to have a different life, but you've tried to leave it behind. Did you try to leave behind a peaceful life rather than a criminal life? So it's suggesting that your character has kind of passed through these different eras of ways that you lived in the world. You've tried to leave something behind, but somebody from your past is still chasing you. This often, I think, suggests you've left behind like a life of crime or a life you don't want to be a part of, and maybe that suggests something about how you're a hero. But this might be somebody from your past who's chasing you because they have a positive relationship, or they want to renew a positive relationship with you. Chasing you doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to like find you and hurt you, but chasing does suggest that they're trying to catch up to you and you don't want to be caught. You can tweak that, of course, but that's kind of how I'm reading it. Oh, number 3, who from your past were you most sad to say goodbye to? So this character could be that person from your past that's chasing you. Maybe you believe you had to leave them behind, even though you love them or care for them. Who are you most sad to say goodbye to could also be from your original home community, right? It suggests another relationship with an individual character, either the same person as in number 2 or a separate person, right? Having a specific character to tie you back to that home community is useful, because then that community can be incarnated and represented in that character. Okay, then we are on to the Seraph. Which god did you devote yourself to, right? This is a important character in your character's life. You made the choice to devote yourself to this god. What incredible feat did they perform for you in a moment of desperation, right? It was your moment of desperation, probably. Maybe it's a moment of their desperation. That would be an interesting, different wrinkle or interpretation to play, right? But they probably did something really big for you when you were in need. So that speaks to a key moment, like an inciting incident in your character's background, right, in their past, that was so big that it created this relationship that you have where you are devoted to this god, this figure. How did your appearance change after taking your oath? For this, I really like when characters try to think about a physical change that represents some intention, some attitude, some experience, some way in which they were kind of emotionally marked by what has happened. If you want to just focus on here's a cool aesthetic thing for my character, I think that's fine. When you're thinking about answering these questions, my impulse is always going to be to try to ask folks to think about how something might take on more than one dimension. And it may just be that asking about that appearance and making follow-up questions about it will help you learn how the player sees that character, and that just gives you more depth there without necessarily having it need to be like a big deal. Like, oh yes, a character who was injured, and then when the god saved them, the scar looks like kintsugi in Japanese pottery. Okay, well that might suggest the idea of somebody who is proud to bear their scars, who feels like this trauma has changed them for the better, that there is beauty in being flawed, in having to repair yourself or be repaired, right? There's some metaphorical thematic juice that we can get out of that if we dig, and if we kind of get, yes, that is where they the repair cracks with gold. It's a Japanese pottery practice, kintsugi, if I use my more better Japanese pronunciation from when I studied Japanese. If it's bad, I apologize, Boss Heart Sensei. It would be wild if my Japanese teacher from high school was watching these streams. Okay. So third question for the Seraph. In what strange or unique way do you communicate with your god, right? This is also, again, about your god, right? So there's a character dimension to this as well, if we're thinking about it. It's suggesting that you are going to have this strange, unique way of communicating. I see this as just encouragement and invitation for the player to say, you're going to be communicating with your god, but let's try to make it interesting, right? Let's dig a little bit deeper in what this is going to look like, what this is going to feel like or sound like, so that when we're doing these scenes, we've already set ourselves up for moments and sequences that are going to be more exciting, right? Do you communicate with your god in dreams where you are on adventures together? Do you communicate with your god? In one game that I ran, a character was playing a ribbit who took a whole teapot and put it in their mouth, and the teapot was a representation of the relationship with the god. And so, like, this was a very comedic game and a very funny comedic way of communicating with the god, because that player is very good at being strange in a fun and exciting way. For sorcerers, what did you do, right? Some action you took that made the people of your community wary of you. Here we are again establishing a relationship between your character and your community. It's not quite as sharp a break, or even necessarily a break, as for somebody like the rogue, but some action you took changed how people in your community thought about you. Because the sorcerer is like the innate magic class, right? This could be like a mutant's eruption, right? Where your power manifests and something happened, and then people became wary of you because they thought you were uncontrollable. And that could then lead into what mentor taught you to control your untamed magic, and why are they no longer able to guide you, right? Control your untamed magic also kind of speaks to character, right? This idea that sorcerers are often characters for whom there is like a theme of control or loss of control to play with or explore. They're no longer able to guide you, which means you kind of have to figure figure it out for yourself, or you have to find another mentor, or you have to deal with your relationship to your magic on your own, right? You are out of the nest in some way or for some reason. But detailing why that is also establishes the kind of new status quo with that mentor should you run into them again, or the situation that you find yourself in terms of when you might want to find another mentor. And then for the sorcerer number 3, you have a deep fear you hide from everyone. What is it and why does it scare you? So there's a little bit of a question of relationship to a community, right? Or a group here in you hide from everyone. Daggerheart, right? This is a game of hope and fear. We have the duality dice, right? So a question that asks you to detail a fear is speaking very strongly to, apologies for the pun, the heart of the game, right? You're asked to have a big fear for your character that you are hiding. And then you're asked not just what you're afraid of, but why, right? Why does this thing scare you? And by intimation, why are you hiding this from people, right? It's not just a fear that you have, it's a fear that you hide. Now maybe you don't hide it from all of the player characters, but you probably hide it from most people that you run into. Okay, last 2 classes. Who taught you to fight, and why did they stay behind when you left home, right? So this is a character relationship. And then motivation, maybe this is your motivation, maybe it's their motivation. It suggests that every warrior learned to fight from somebody. Maybe you change that if you need to, but having that relationship also means that the educational pedagogical aspect of that is also part of your character's backstory, right? Number 2, somebody defeated you in battle years ago and left you to die. You fought somebody, you lost, they left you to die. So you're going to ask, who was this and how did they betray you, right? It's not just suggesting that somebody defeated you and that they left you to die, but that this was also somehow a betrayal, right? Was this a friend who switched sides? Did you switch sides and you failed to get them to convert, and so you felt like that was a betrayal? Why did they leave you to die instead of finishing you off? Was that intended as a mercy, or was leaving you to die the betrayal because they thought you were going to die, right? There's a bunch of different angles you could take that, right? I'm not going to finish you off, but I am going to leave you to die. Did they think they were leaving you to die, or did they think that they were sparing you? So you can speak a little bit to their motivation, or you can leave that to the GM and you just focus on your relationship to them, who they were to you, and how you feel betrayed by what they did. And number 3, what legendary place have you always wanted to visit, and why is it so special, right? It's special. Is it special to you? Is it special more broadly? It's a legendary place. It's not just a place you want to visit, right? You want to go to the big city. It's a legendary place. How did you learn about this place? Why is it that you want to go here? What would it mean for you to be able to visit this legendary place? And last, we have the wizard. What responsibilities did your community count on you for? This suggests you had a key role, probably, in your community, right? It was some kind of responsibility. Maybe it wasn't that key, but you were counted on for something, and you let them down. How did you let them down, right? There's some kind of failure built into the backstory of built into a lot of these prompts, right? That your character is trying to recover from something or make up for something. That will give you something to prove or something to accomplish. Coming out of character creation without clear motivation can be really tricky, because then you have to find it in play, and it's harder for the GM to know how to try to motivate the character because they don't have a clear direction or a clear sense of what that surface along which they can have that push-pull is. Number 2, you've spent your life searching for a book or object of great significance. What is it, and why is it so important to you, right? So this is a thing. It's important to you. An object of great significance for a wizard almost is probably going to be a magic thing, right? Book or object. So this could be, is this a grimoire? Is this a book from your family? Is this something that was taken from you or taken from your family at an early age, right? You spent your life, your whole life, or just part of your life. That can be flexible, right? Why is this thing so important to you? It's so important that it's one of your backstory prompts, right? So you want to make it be really important because these are just the first pillars that the game is asking you to establish for the character. And as I interpret the player and GM principles, right, we're not being asked to detail everything about who a person is and was. We're getting some solid foundational elements, and then we're going to discover and to create the rest in play. Number 3, you have a powerful rival. Who are they, and why are you so determined to defeat them? Love a rival. One of my favorite prompts as well, because this suggests you have an intense emotional relationship with this character, and because they're a rival and they are powerful, you are probably the underdog when you run into them, at least the first time, right? I have used a wizard's rival in... Anytime I've had a wizard in a one-shot, that rival has been a pretty important character from the games that I can remember. Right? I've tried to either use that rival or have somebody representing that rival if it didn't make sense for the character to confront the rival right away at level 1. Why are you so determined to defeat them? It's not just that they are your rival. Something about your relationship to them or what they represent or what they stand for or pursue drives you to defeat them. So, lots of great material here. Moving on, right, I want to talk about using the laws of narrative conservation. What are the laws of narrative conservation, Mike? These are a thing I've made up. My idea here mostly is, and this is wisdom or guidance that I've seen elsewhere in storytelling, so I'm not going to claim to, like, I'm the first one to ever had this thought, because that's silly. It can often be more powerful in storytelling to reintroduce a character that was already in the story and give them a new job, show that they weren't done, have them return for some way, make them take on a new agenda. It's often easier or more effective emotionally to reuse a character than to introduce yet another new character. I'm not saying that every NPC in the character backstories of your Daggerheart characters have to be the same NPC. That could probably get silly. But if you've got 4 PCs and each of them has one specific NPC that they've identified, I might try to see if it makes sense to have that be 3 characters, maybe even 2 characters, where somebody's rival was somebody's mentor. Or that a faction for character number 1 includes the NPC for character number 4. So that one character can mean something to 2 different player characters, right? In Apocalypse World, they taught, I believe it's, that's the first time I saw it, or that's what I hear people talk about. It had the idea of creating PC, NPC, PC triangles, right? Where there's an NPC here, and then a PC here, and then another PC here, and that NPC has different relationships to each of those 2 characters, right? Linking them together also helps bond the player characters together, said Cardboard and Jar. Precisely the point, right? This is, if there's one thing you take away from this video, it's exactly this point. Try to have a faction try to have character A's faction include character B's NPC. Think about how somebody who's important for one character might then take on importance for another character, or be revealed to have always been somebody who was important to the other character. The earlier you can do some of this, the easier it is to get buy-in, I think, right? In character creation or doing session zeros, I will often just straight up ask, so do we think that this mentor is actually also part of this faction over here. So, laws of narrative conservation, other aspects of this idea. An NPC might share another character's motivation or directly oppose it, right? Some NPC created in Backstory is a foil to another PC because they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. They might be a rival where they are trying to accomplish mutually exclusive objectives. Or they might be a rival where they're each trying to accomplish something and they are antagonistic toward each other, but the rival is not necessarily a villain, right? Two different heroes who are both trying to become the champion of a god are rivals. And they might oppose each other, but then at some point or at certain points, they actually are teaming up for a fight because they're both opposing that god's enemies. Right? And places where you can then reverse or complicate characters' relationships to non-player characters, or where you can prompt characters to interacting with each other because one NPC that they share means something different to each of them, right? What if one character's rival was another character's mentor, and then they run into that mentor again, and the rival is like, I'm gonna kill him, and they're like, but that's my mentor, right? I don't often find that Daggerheart is the game where I want full player character versus player character, like outward combat. Interpersonal tensions, intra-party tensions, those I think can be good as long as everybody's on the same page and excited about exploring those complicated relationships. So other ways of being efficient here, right? A faction might be tied to an important place or a settlement that was detailed in somebody else's background, right? This group that is hunting the druid is based in the community that the wizard let down. And so that ties the druid to that community along this vector of antagonism through that group that is hunting the druid. You may then even be able to dig in deeper and incarnate a specific NPC who is the lead person that's hunting the druid, or try to think about an NPC in that faction already connected to a different character, or that you can connect to a different character so that there is an individual through whom these relationships flow. Yeah, thanks for hanging out, Cardboard Enjoyer. Catch you later. Right, next facet or way that you can do this thing. A faction or NPC stands in opposition to or pursues the same objective or motivation, right? These are pretty similar, but they're not exactly the same, right? We have a faction here. You have the same motivation, but to different ends, right? Two characters want to become the greatest wizard in the world. One of them wants to do it because they weren't able to save their family as a kid, and they want to be powerful enough to never have to lose anybody ever again. And another character wants to become the most powerful to show up a member of their family, right? Or wants to become the most powerful so that they can conquer death itself and never have to die. Or that they can bring back a loved one who died, right? You can have the same objective for different motivations, or you can have the same motivation put to different objectives. But if there is an NPC that kind of lives in that intersection, especially if there's two characters who have similar or parallel objectives or motivations, or you create a connection between those motivations or objectives through conflating or creating a faction or character that lives in that intersection or that overlap of what these different characters want. Pardon me, just stretching real quick. And then two PCs might share a motivation or a similar motivation that both oppose a given faction, right? We go, okay, you created this faction, but they actually would oppose what you're trying to do, or do you think that you would be directly opposed to what they're trying to do? And we talk about how and why that is the case. So often a lot of this will be pretty easy, or can be easy to find especially if the group is all doing these background questions together, which I recommend, and especially if they're already used to the idea of wanting to create connections between their characters before or above and beyond the specific connection questions in Daggerheart, right? Those connections are often really about the individual characters' relationships to each other, but sometimes they also include some of these other elements, right? You made me make a promise. You're the only one I've told this secret to. The connections and background questions can often feed into or out of one another, but they don't necessarily have to. And so in session 0, sometimes later, but often in session 0, I will try to find places to ask follow-up questions to start doing this work of integrating and interweaving character backstories, right? So in a game I played in this last weekend, or that I ran, for some friends, one player made a seraph and was formerly a king, like a guard of the king, right? Like a king's guard, if we're thinking like Game of Thrones, right? And it was established that the king was assassinated. And so now this character is a king's guard without a king. And that's a defining experience and element of that character's backstory. So most of the time when we think about like a royal guard, there's several people. And so I decided to create a other Kingsguard character, and then when I introduced that character, I asked the player who was playing the Kingsguard why. But basically, I wanted him to be able to define some of his relationship to that guard, but I framed it in such a way where I'm saying like, hey, this is going to be an antagonistic relationship, but I want to give you some authority on the details of how this works. And that other Kingsguard used the martial art of a second player character, right? So you used to be a guard to this king, so you're connected to the seraph character, but you use the same martial arts as this brawler character. So here is one NPC that is connected to 2 player characters. The intensity of that emotional relationship does not necessarily have to be the same for that character to be useful, because I can then have that character act along either axis or vector of antagonism, right? When the character uses the Spore martial art, that is engaging the brawler character. But if they use it against the other Kingsguard, that's also engaging that other character. So with one character and one type of action, I am creating buy-in emotionally for 2 players through their characters, right? And if I can do that pretty often, I'm going to feel really good about my idea about being able to both give spotlight to and emotionally engage more than one character at a time, especially trying to engage and spotlight everybody over the course of a session. In a one-shot, that can be a little bit harder. I often find that in a one-shot, I have a really strong emotional tie that I can find for 3 characters, but I have a less strong one for the 4th. And when that happens, I try to figure out some other way to give a lot of spotlight to, or to find an emotional connection for that character, even if it's not as integrated with everything else that's happening in that story. And this is like in a best case scenario, right? I'm not going to be able to have a strong emotional hook necessary that is very personal to every single PC in every session of a campaign that I'm running. In a one shot, I try to go as hard and hit as much as I can so that everybody has that buy-in and we get to kind of jump forward really quickly to that emotional intensity. But sometimes it's hard. Other things I might ask about is, what group does this person represent, right? Let's take an NPC and let's establish them or ground them within a faction, right? Take an NPC and put them into the context of a faction. Take an NPC, put them into context of a location. Say, is it okay if your rival is from this town? What if your faction recruited this other character's sibling? Or what if this person that you failed, Guardian, decided that they had to protect themselves and say they joined this faction that is hunting the druid. Right? We're creating these triangles. If you can create quadrangles, pentagons, right? If you can do a more complicated thing where one faction is created to 3 characters through 2 NPCs, right? That's even more powerful. But when you're starting to do all this integrating character backstory work, I would say probably start by making triangles and then see where that gets you, and then decide if you have the ability to create even stronger connections right away. Otherwise, you can build on these connections through play by introducing new characters, by giving existing characters additional dimension. This character joins this faction, or because of something that happens in play, this character becomes a rival of your character, even though they used to be a friend of this other character. Right? They started out, here's an NPC, they're connected to one PC, but something in play created an emotional relationship with a separate PC, and so now they are able to comprise that triangle. So when I do it, I try to be pretty obvious in session 0, right? I'll say, let's make a specific NPC, or I will ask those leading questions of, so who in the Kingsguard did you always look up to but never respected you? Right? And then the player will give me some answers. And then I say, what do we think, what do we think if that other Kingsguard is from this part of the country that your character is from? So I try to do that as well. Asking questions like this will also prompt the players to start thinking about these questions and this idea as well. So they may then volunteer ways to start to tie together some more of the characters, right? Well, what if this and this were connected, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the same, right? Your rival could be the spouse of somebody who then is connected to another character. It may be not as strong of a connection, but it is a connection, and it gives you a little bit more, right? There's 2 objects that you can move, and that's interesting. And so I'm just going to pull back from this. Those are basically my big thoughts on this. To go beyond, I would need more specific examples, and I can talk through some of them. But in general, I think that integrating player character backstories is here are my points. 1, I think it's good and useful to do this. 2, I wanted to talk about how I think the Daggerheart background questions set groups up for doing it. I wanted to talk some about what I see as the different contours and elements that the background questions help a group establish. The idea, right? The next is the idea that I encourage people to be specific and to try to dig a bit deeper into emotion and motivation, and to think about these questions as creating the building blocks that the group will use to create the foundation for your story, right? These are backstory questions. Most of the campaign is front story, right? It starts after you begin in your scene play. But you don't have to stop doing this kind of thinking of shared creation of NPCs and factions and places and thinking about how to connect them with one another once you get out of session 0. I would strongly encourage you as a player or as a GM to keep that mindset, look for places to make connections and suggest them, right? Pitch this to your fellow players, pitch these ideas to your GM, depending on what you like in your table, right? Where you want the lines of authority to go. Maybe you send that as a private message, or you have a chat with the GM on the side, or you chat with the other player and then you come to the GM and say, hey, we have this idea on how something might be connected for our 2 characters, or to set up a plot line for our characters to be a little bit at odds with each other but still be friends. The tools and the principles and the techniques in Daggerheart, I think, provide or help you do these things and benefit greatly from when you do these things. And then I wanted to talk about some of the techniques, specifics that I use in trying to create these integrations. whether that's in session 0 or it is in play. I think that hard framing the introduction of an NPC where I'm going to define a certain amount of what this NPC is in terms of their relationship to you, but you get to define more about who this person is, ancestry, community, their look, their vibe, and then what the player character's opinion of them is, so that these characters are collaboratively made, and that will help the player, ideally, have a greater emotional buy-in of the NPC right away. And I felt like I've had pretty good success doing this, especially in some of the more recent one-shots. This game that I ran on this last Sunday, right? That night got buy-in really powerfully, very quickly. I had a wizard, so I had their rival. And for that rival, I made them a mirror to the wizard character, right? So the wizard character had one particular vibe, and I gave this rival a opposite vibe and used that to inform her worldview, and then revealed that her vibe was was a lie in a way that is then illustrative, and it creates greater contrast with the wizard character, who was kind of messy in a very authentic way, right? I was trying to have the thematic elements of how this character was defined mirror and stand in contrast to the specific characterization decisions that the player of the wizard had made. In a one-shot, you've got to be really efficient, and I feel like I often will give myself permission to be a little bit more broad, because we just don't have time to do all of the up and down and linger on like texture and nuance as much. If we're here to do a one-shot, it's like a movie. If we're doing a campaign can be more like a television show or a novel. And so there's different expectations in terms of pacing and how direct things are going to be. And, this is a bit of a generalization. Maybe I'm comparing more action movies to, a similar genre and tone television show, right? Action movies tend to be more straightforward and big and broad, but a film can also have nuance. So it's not necessarily only one thing or another, but just trying to have a few different ways of talking about how I see the different options and approaches that you might take in doing all of this stuff. When you have a campaign, you have longer to be able to do this work of threading things together, and you don't have to deploy all of these interconnections all at the same time right away, right? It may feel more organic to begin to weave more things together over time, and then you're doing more revealing of connections that already existed here and then a little bit later, or you're letting people like unwrap or unravel something and realize that characters and places and things are more connected than you expected. And that will hopefully help give you that sense of emotional investment, a sense of progression and growth and twists and surprises that, whatever it is that you're looking for from your game of Daggerheart. So those are my thoughts on integrating and interweaving character backstories, talking about the background questions in Daggerheart and things like that. I want to remind folks that if you like my thoughts about Daggerheart and RPGs in general, I have a Patreon, and all paid patrons have access to a shorter video I made earlier this week on using environments in Daggerheart to streamline and speed up your GM prep. It's just 10 minutes. This was me experimenting with a much shorter form. I kind of wrote myself more of a script. This video will go public in about a week, but if you were already thinking about becoming a paid subscriber, here is an extra immediate incentive of something cool that you will get access to right away. Next week, Wednesday, will be the day that I'm traveling to Gen Con. And so that short video that I made will go live next Wednesday in public. And that way I will have a new video that's coming out over the course of that week. It is possible that I will record something at Gen Con, but I'm definitely not promising it. Gen Con very quickly becomes overwhelming, and I'm going to focus on finding games, maybe getting to play some games, seeing friends and colleagues that I don't get to see very often, and the various social events and obligations that I have, doing my panels at the Gen Con Writers Symposium and things like that. If you are going to be at Gen Con, and it is not yet Gen Con 2025 when you watch this, you can find me in a couple of panels at the Gen Con Writers Symposium. Let me pull up the post that I made that has my schedule. So you can find me on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern in Marriott Ballroom 4 for How to Navigate the Industry. And this is science fiction fantasy prose publishing mostly. And then on Saturday, I am on a panel at 4 p.m. in Marriott Ballroom 2 on building a long-term career. And here I'll talk about fiction career and game design. And for these panels, I'm not going to be able to talk really specifically about Daggerheart because these are not like promotional events that I've coordinated with Darrington, but I'll speak more broadly about game design, and then I can speak freely about my own writing. So you can find me there. If you know me from these videos and you're going to be at Gen Con and you want to come to one of these panels and say hi, I invite you to do so right before the panel, if I'm just hanging out in the hallway, or after the panel. If I'm at the table and we're about to get started, it's probably not the best time to do that, but otherwise you can look for me there. If you find me out and about, you're welcome to say hi. I may have to apologize in the future, in advance, that the convention can be really overwhelming for me at times, and so depending on when you catch me, I may not have a lot of social energy, but I do really appreciate all of the attention and support and encouragement that folks have given to me for these streams, for the material that I've made in terms of support and resources for Daggerheart, for my contributions to the game and things like that. It may feel a little cheesy to say this game has changed my life. It's certainly changed my career, and my career is a big part of my life, and so it has changed my life. The life I am living in terms of making these videos and building toward doing new homebrew, third-party publishing for Daggerheart, compatible material after Gen Con, any future work that I get, whether that's with Darrington or others. A lot of that is because of the work that I've done on Daggerheart, and then some of it is because of the audience and the feedback I have gotten on this material after the game has come out. And so thank you again to everybody who is watching these, has watched them, for folks that have joined the Patreon, who comment on the YouTube, all of that kind of good stuff. Hi, Trifity Mats. Thank you so much. Is that like a dolphin? It's like a dolphin applauding. That's very cool. Thank you. So again, yeah, just a quick love fest to all of you. No new stream next week, but there will be a video on YouTube. And then after Gen Con, I'll have tons of things to talk about. I've got some balls that are beginning to roll that I'll be able to kind of officially get started on after Gen Con. Also, as I remember yet another thing, if you didn't see, I am now officially going to be contributing to the Incredible Creatures project, which is art-inspired adversaries that are Daggerheart compatible. This is a cool campaign. It's being run by Alan. I'm just going to try and find... I don't want to misspeak. Alan Tucker. Yes, I was pretty sure that was the name, but I didn't want to misspeak. Hi, Alan. Thanks for bringing me on this. So that campaign is still going as of the day when this video is happening. 6 days to go. So you can check out that campaign and see if you want to go ahead and back it. And there are, I would say, potential other things afoot for that campaign that you'll want to be on the lookout for if you go and take a look at the campaign. So that is very exciting. Yes, it is a dolphin clapping. Cosmo says, thank you for the great tips and making us better players and GMs. Oh, also heard about that with Foundry support being a stretch goal. Yes, I think that is the next stretch goal for for the campaign, right? Mine was 15,000. At 17,500, we'll add digital files for VTT tokens to use in your favorite tabletop program. So the campaign is currently at 16,883, so very doable. 6 days left. Go check that out. If you are watching this later and the campaign has closed, check out the Kickstarter page anyway, because there might be a way to back, to do like a late backer edition. And if not, then follow Alan's Kickstarter page, because who knows what happens in the future. I imagine this one has done well. They'll probably do more Daggerheart compatible material in the future. So that's all that. Let's take a look in the land of Twitch for who we can raid today and give a send-off. Send some love to somebody else out there in Twitch land. So let's go and raid Steve Saylor. So Steve is a streamer and disability advocate and gamer, and recently ran a Age of Umbra one-shot or mini-series. So I know that Steve is like familiar with Daggerheart, has said some very nice things about Daggerheart, and so let's go ahead and send some folks his way. You can say Team Turbo is here. I'll go and introduce myself so you don't have to introduce me. So it looks like Steve is playing Magic the Gathering right now. I haven't played Magic in a while, but it was a big foundational game for me. So we're going to go raid Steve. Thanks again for everybody watching, and I'll see you next time. Here's where I do the raiding part. I have to click some buttons. All right, we're going to be ready to raid in just a few moments. Thanks for those who are hanging out to do the raid. And we're just about there. Okay. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Go have fun with Steve.